I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Wang, to the stage.
All right, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at today's data science research bazaar. I'm a applied science agricultural researcher. So we're going to switch gear from the direct research on data science and AI to the application of AI in real world. So I'm an associate professor and state extension specialist working closely with the agricultural industry in Wisconsin. And how to advance?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. So traditionally, we all know that agriculture will need different practices, including irrigation, fertilization, pesticide application, and such, right? And traditionally, most of these practices are based upon experiences. The growers pass on the knowledge from one generation to the next. But in more recent years, most of the proactive ones started to adopt the precision agriculture AI-driven technologies, including the advanced cutting-edge sensing and modeling techniques to monitor the crop growth and predict the final yield before the end of the season. In agricultural industry, we call the practice of applying the right amount of resource, including water, pesticide, fertilizer, in the right way, right time, right place, and using the right technology. And we call them as the agricultural 5R strategy. Among all the crops, including the corn, soybean, vegetables, fruits, the high-value vegetables and fruit crops are great candidates to adopt the precision agriculture practices or technologies because one, they have high cost of inputs, and two, these crops are more sensitive to the change of production practices and the environmental conditions during the growing season. So we can manipulate our practices more precisely and change the final yield and quality. The ultimate goal of using AI-driven precision ag practices is to reduce the impact of agricultural production on the environment. And so that we do not have to overuse the resources like irrigation water, pesticide, fertilizer, and others. Here are two examples of using precision ag. Sorry, I think my pictures are too large. So the first example is to use the thermal image over collected during the growing season to see the pattern of irrigation management. The picture on the left is RGB image. That is not very clear to identify any pattern, but if we can see the thermal image on the right, you can see that the crops that have been irrigated just now have a way lower surface temperature compared to those that have not been irrigated. So for the growers, it's very easy for them to detect any abnormal pattern, right? If the irrigation system is having problems or something else, so they can make immediate response to their crops. The second example is we use a robotic dog to walk over an onion field, and the dog carries some an RGB camera. And so we collected hundreds and thousands of images over the whole field. And then we can use deep learning to detect each onion bulb in those images and use machine learning, deep learning to estimate the sizes of the onion bulbs. These information will be critical for the growers to stay profitable. So these are two examples of using the AI and data science on commercial fields. And in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about two projects conducted by my group. The first one is to compare the hyperspectral with multispectral imagery for predicting different crop yield under varied nitrogen treatments. We all know that the RGB image is a regular camera, right? We can use our naked eye to detect the RGB wavelengths. For the multispectral camera, it can cover the reflectance of 5 to 7 broad bands. And these are separate individual bands that are not continuous. A drone can carry the multispectral camera, and so this system is relatively cheap, about $3,000 to $8,000 per system, including the camera and the drone. In comparison, the hyperspectral imagery will cover the reflectance of hundreds of narrow bands. So in the spectrum, we can see a continuous change of the reflectance data, right? So obviously, this covers more nuanced information about the plants we're setting up. But the downside is that it's going to be very expensive, more than $100,000 per system. And we usually have to use a pilot to hire a pilot, fly an aircraft with the cameras. So the growers are interested in learning, like, what is the difference between the multi and hyperspectral imagery. In the year 2023, we used 3 different crops grown at the University Research Station in central Wisconsin. We grew potatoes, snap beans, and kidney beans. These are all financially important crops in Wisconsin. We put them under different nitrogen treatments so we can see their yield difference. And then during the growing season, we collected multiple dates of both multispectral and hyperspectral imagery. They were collected on the same day, by the way. And then at the end of the season, we will measure the yield of each crop under each nitrogen treatment, and we pair the yield data up with the in-season either hyperspectral or multispectral imagery data via machine learning model. In this case, is XGBoost. Just want to mention, because the length of the growing seasons are different among the 3 crops, we had different dates of imagery. So for snap beans, it's only 60-day crop. We only have 4 days. For potatoes and kidney beans, it has longer than 100 days. So we collected 8 dates of imagery. This table is showing you the coefficient of determination for the yield prediction results. In the upper part, we have the multispectral imagery prediction of different dates. In the lower part, we have the hyperspectral imagery, and then for each of the crops. So bear with me. We're finding 2 primary messages from this table. One, if we compare the multispectral with the hyperspectral for kidney beans and snap beans, over the course of the season, we're not really seeing substantial differences of coefficient of determination, R-squared, between the multi and hyper, right? But for potatoes, it's pretty obvious that, especially later in the season, the R-squared values are way higher, way higher than the R-squared in the multispectral. The hyperspectral R-squared are way higher than multispectral. What is the reason for that? Well, potatoes grow in the soil. It's an underground crop. If we only sense the reflectance on the canopy, it seems like it's not sufficient information to predict yield, which is a tuber growing in the soil, right? For the snap beans and kidney beans, they're both above ground crops. We can directly sense the pods, the leaves, flowers, vines, and such directly using the drone or using the sensor. So we think that for the more complicated crops like potatoes, we need more information and more sophisticated system, like hyperspectral. For the kidney beans and snap beans, maybe the more cost-effective multispectral sensor will be enough. The second takeaway is that if we compare between the multi and hyperspectral imagery for all 3 crops, the hyperspectral imagery will achieve higher R-squared values to predict final yield, about 16 days ahead of what can be achieved by the multispectral, right? Again, this might boil down to the fact that the hyperspectral can cover more nuanced information, continuous change of reflectance of the canopies, right, during the growing season. So the more cost, the higher cost of the hyperspectral system might be beneficial to cover more information earlier in the season. And this 16 days is actually really critical for the growers to make responsive practices like applying water, nitrogen, pesticide, and such as early as possible to achieve higher yield potential. So next, we want to see, okay, we have multiple dates of imaging. Can we cross-validate between different dates? So what we did here is to use the first data of imaging data, data of imaging to calibrate the model, and then use the last data of imaging to validate the model. Well, again, for kidney beans and snap beans, the pointer doesn't really work. Kidney beans and snap beans, the R-squared value are moderate, right? Not really poor, but for potatoes, it's really poor. So again, we double our confidence here that for a more complicated crop like potato growing in a soil that we cannot directly sense, we need more information. So last winter, my postdoc and I co-authored a paper to study what factors really affect the yield of potatoes. We found that the yield is actually a result of the four-way interactions between genetics, which is a cultivar we're growing, environmental factors like soil moisture, soil temperature, solar radiation, and such, management practices like how much nitrogen we apply, how much irrigation water we applied, how much pesticide we applied, as well as the technologies, the remote sensing, either hyper or multispectral, and modeling. So we have to improve all four factors here to achieve higher yield. Instead of for snap beans and kidney beans, we can directly using the technological data for predicting the yield. So this is a very busy graph. You don't have to understand everything, but just a quick takeaway here is that we found if we use all four factors that I was showing in the previous slide, we could consistently achieve high R-squared value for predicting yield for each individual year of 5 years, as well as combining all of the years, compared to when we use only some of the factors, right? So potatoes, again, are complicated. We have to collect as much information as we can to do a better job with yield prediction. But for snap beans and kidney beans, we think they can just take advantage of the cost-effective multispectral sensor and directly using the sensing data. So the second project I want to present is to use the ground penetrating radar, GPR, for predicting not only yield, but also other traits of interest for potatoes. I was talking about the hyperspectral imagery, which covers the visible, near-infrared, and shortwave infrared region on the electromagnetic spectrum. For the GPR, we are taking advantage of the microwave region, which is having longer wavelengths compared to the hyperspectral. The GPR system has been widely used, well studied in both engineering for construction, archaeology, soil science, environmental science for detecting the objects buried in the soil. And sometimes they can go really deep. It's a non-invasive geological methodology that can measure the reflection of the microwave signal from the sensor to the objects in the soil, and then create images. Similar mechanism to the hyperspectral, but here is using a different region of the signal. The downside of the GPR system is that we have to wait until the soil dry up. So when the soil is moist, the water in the soil will interrupt the signal. There are two types of GPR systems. One is to use a wheel-driven, ground-based GPR sensor, directly collecting the signal. And then also we can use the drone-based sensor. We have to make sure the drone-based sensor does not have any canopy. The soil needs to be bare because otherwise the canopy will interrupt the signal. So the goal of this study is to develop an AI-driven GPR system that can integrate the multi-channel hardware with deep learning or machine learning models to non-destructively monitor whatever interest, traits of interest we want to study on for the underground crops, potatoes, carrots, sugar beets, and such. We developed a cheap system with 8 antennas in a box. This is a 3D printed box. And these antenna will send microwave signals downwards to the soil, detect the potato tubers in the soil, and then the signal will be sending back to the microcomputer in the box. And then we can translate the signal. We have the range of 0.5 to 2.0 gigahertz for the microwave signal in this study. And then because of the labor-intensive nature of the work, we only measured 300 true potato tubers for the ground truthing data, and we use data simulation for creating the other 2,700 data. So totally we have 3,000 data points. What's really interesting finding here is that we found different traits needs different approaches. So a simple trait like the potato volume, we can easily use the GPR sensing data to directly predict. All the 8 antenna here can send the microwave signal from different directions to the tuber, right? And then they can create this imaging data through machine learning model. We can predict the 3D sizes of each individual tuber. We found that the prediction works really well. The error is lower than 9% here, and all the data, so x-axis is the ground truthing data, y-axis is predicted data, they're all close to the 1-to-1 line, right? So potato volume could be well predicted by the GPR data directly. Then we move on to see if we can predict other traits using the GPR data. Well, this time for starch content, we cannot. I'm not showing the data here, but we cannot directly predict the specific gravity or the starch content of the tuber. So then what? We found that the specific gravity or the starch content of the tuber is directly related to the dielectric constant of the tuber. So we figure that maybe we can use the GPR to predict the dielectric constant first, right? And then using the predicted dielectric constant to predict the starch content. So we measure the ground truthing data first for both the starch content and the dielectric constant. And then we build this almost perfect negative linear relationship between the dielectric constant and the specific gravity or the starch content. Almost a perfect negative linear relationship. So the higher the dielectric constant the tubers have, the lower the starch content they will have. And that holds true across the range of the GPR spectrum, right? Really exciting. So then we use the fully connected neutral network to predict first the dielectric constant using the GPR data, and then finally predict the starch content. And the model works really well. The arrow number here is really low, lower than 0.1%. So really exciting. Now we know that we can use the GPR data to both directly and indirectly predict traits of interest from our crops. The next stage is to keep using the GPR to create the real-time 3D images of the potatoes growing in the soil during the growing season, so we can use this technology to non-invasively monitor the growth of the tubers, and the growers don't have to walk into their field. So it's very time-consuming, labor-intensive, and cause a lot of financial burden to the growers. If we can adopt this technology, that the growers can see their true tuber growth non-invasively, this is going to be a huge milestone for the vegetable industry. So I have been working with the agricultural AI and data science over the last 7+ years. I have some takeaways in general, and I have shared these information with the growers, my stakeholders. Their biggest fear so far is that I might lose my job, right? AI is going to replace me. And what I told them is you will not be replaced because AI needs to be trained by humans. And they can only do the repetitive work so far, right? So, but in general, the growers, they do not have the expertise or the necessary education to know well about AI and data science. And so we have to do more extension and outreach so that they can be more knowledgeable about the advantage of AI. But the disadvantage of AI or big data is that they're overwhelming, right? For a grower or an agricultural professional, it's too much. And I do not know how to interpret these data. And the other sort of difficulty I found so far is that I'm not sure if we can develop a well-generalized model that can be applicable to all different environments, all farms, all varieties, all crops. I just don't think it's possible, right? So what I can do, or we can do so far, is to work with specific environment or farms or crops so that we can be more specific with our modeling. It's going to be, I think it's going to be impossible to generalize everything. We need more specific information to develop robust model. After 6-7 years of research at the university research farm, now we're ready to move to the commercial fields. We're working with 4 different commercial vegetable farmers this summer to further validate our models, and they are really excited about that. So I think that's a good step before we can see wider adoption of AI and big data by the commercial agricultural industry. I think the proactive growers are looking forward to that. The more conservative folks are still waiting. And we need to do more demonstration to successfully encourage the adoption of AI. With that, I would like to end my talk here. Thank all my funding supporters. Then from this list of collaborators, you can see this is a highly interdisciplinary research area, right? And then I really appreciate all my colleagues' hard work and thank all my mentees, undergrads, grads, and postdocs who have made this work possible. Thank you. Well, one question? Yes. Sure, really good question. The using GPR to predict roots of trees have been studied. We haven't done that for potatoes. So the difficulty is the potatoes, the fibrous root systems is very difficult to sense, but we will study on that in the near future. For the other crop, I think the carrots, which is a taproot, the radish, a taproot, maybe sweet potato, also a root system, might be getting decent results. That's my hypothesis. But for other, like potatoes, I think potatoes, unfortunately, is the most difficult crop I've seen so far. Yeah, thank you.